Hi everyone, my name is Father Chuck Kramer and I'm the rector here at St. James Episcopal Church in Hyde Park. For the past 10 years, we have hosted our historic graveyard tours and they have become an institution here in town. People love them so much that they order their tickets well in advance. We even have a couple of groups that organize annual graveyard tour tailgate parties. But this year, as with so many things, the coronavirus has forced us to cancel the tours. We had to do it because we didn't want to risk anybody getting sick. But there is a bright side. This gives us an opportunity to look back and revisit old friends that we had met in past tours and maybe had forgotten. More on that later. First, I wanted to tell you a little bit about St. James. It was founded in 1811 by a group of wealthy Hyde Parkers led by Dr. Samuel Bard. You may have heard of him. He was the personal physician of George Washington. A lot of the people buried here did amazing things, but they also participated in some great evil that we don't want to whitewash. Dr. Bard, for example, was an unrepentant slaveholder. People who helped establish this church belonged to the power elite, and they did not willingly let go of their power. But some of them used their privilege for the good of all humanity. Elbridge Gerry, for example, who's buried here, he founded an organization, an agency that would later become known as Child Protective Services. There's a lot that we can learn even now. So tonight, I'd like to give you the opportunity to revisit some of those friends, to go rekindle some of those old acquaintances, and maybe meet a few new folks that you missed in past years. Come on, let's go have a look. Well, look, here's one of our friends now. Margaret, Norrie, I believe. Good evening, Mrs. Norrie.
Where is your mask, sir?
Oh, forgot. COVID.
COVID? What is COVID? I am speaking of the Spanish flu, my good man. Back in my day, we had to wear these face coverings to protect us from the ravages of that dreadful disease. Do keep your distance, sir. I mean, even the dead have to be smart.
Well, in that case, maybe you would be able to take our friends off to a tour of the graveyard and meet some of the residents there, and I will stay safe and sound back here.
I accept your invitation. Very well, please follow me to my home. Well, now that Father Chuck is a safe distance away, I can remove my face covering. Now allow me to formally introduce myself. I am Margaret Morgan Norrie. Now you may have noticed there's some notable names in my moniker, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. I was born September 3rd, 1869, just up the road in Staatsburg to William Dare Morgan and Angelica Livingston Hoyt. Now the Hoyts can be traced all the way back to Alexander Hamilton. You may have heard of him. I do believe there was a small musical written about him, but I'm not really sure that it got much publicity. And well, the Livingstons, they hardly need an introduction. Members from that branch of the family tree signed the Declaration of Independence and fought in the American Revolutionary War. And of course, we're known for our many homes along the Hudson and our artistic skills. But that is more than enough about them. I say we get back to me. On June 15th, 1897, I married wealthy banker Adam Gordon Lewis. We spent much of our adult lives living in New York City, and in 1901, I gave birth to our one and only son, Louis Gordon Norrie. Well, of course, it could have been very easy for me to enjoy the comfort of wealth and the luxury that it provides, but instead, I engrossed myself in the needs of the world around me, and I became passionate about the women's movement and the suffragette movement. I allied myself with many crusaders. I was so devoted to women's rights that if you look across my lifespan, I served with 28 organizations. I held positions such as chairman of the 10th election district for the Empire State Committee in 1913, and in 1919 I reorganized the Women's City Club in Poughkeepsie, and I was elected regional director for the Women League of Voters, and that is just a small sampling. My work fulfilled me, my family fulfilled me, but we were met with tragedy. My one and only son died at the age of 22 in 1923. He was attending Princeton at the time, and he was involved in a fatal car accident in Asbury Park, New Jersey. His body was returned home to Hyde Park, and we held his services right here at St. James with Reverend Newton officiating. A playground was erected in memory of my sweet boy, and you can still visit it today on the grounds of Norrie State Park. I was overjoyed when I learned that they recently renovated it and installed a brand new playground for children of all ages to enjoy for many years to come. Now, by that time, and in 1925, my husband and I, we divided our time between here in the country and in the city. When up here, we resided at the Morgan estate in Statsburg. My life, too, was cut short due to an illness, and at the age of 57, I passed away at our home on East 61st Street. My ever-devoted husband passed just 10 days later, so on August 25th, 1926, the three of us were reunited. We are all three buried here at St. James, where we rest in peace eternally. I did lead an exciting life, and I am proud of all my accomplishments, but I am just one of hundreds of women who served the suffragette movement here in Dutchess County. As we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, it is important that we remember the suffragists and the suffragettes that dedicated their passion and time to this wonderful cause and served it with understanding, strength, and dignity. May we all take a stand with traits like that in mind. Oh, goodness, listen to me about to make another speech. I did plenty of that in my lifetime. I think it's time that I introduce you to one of our other St. James neighbors. Let us start with Emma Victoria Pitkin Marshall. Oh, what a pip.
Oh, there you are. Oh, it is so good to see you. I assume you have come seeking guidance from the afterlife, yes? Well, you certainly have come to the right place. You see, I am Emma Victoria Pitkin Marshall, but you can forget that. I'll explain later. And in my day, I was a rather well-known poet. And although my poetry covered a truly broad range of topics, in my early days, I was best known for my spiritualistic poetry. Spiritualistic poetry, as you know, deals with spiritualism. That is to say, communication with the dead. And you see, spiritualists believed that learning and growth does not end with death. That the dead can serve as spirit guides for the living. Yes, I know many of you consider this New Age, a bit weird, but trust me, in my era, spiritualism was taken very seriously by the very best sort of people. And churches, people in all churches practice spiritualism. Baptists, Methodists, Quakers, even Episcopalians. And it was especially embraced by women. You see, we discovered that women spiritualists were taken just as seriously as male spiritualists, there being no hierarchy in the afterlife. I attended seances. I visited hypnotists, as did many of the time. Well, did you know Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame was an avowed spiritualist? But I digress. My poetry. In 1912, a lovely book was published, Guardian Angel and Other Poems. It was really quite popular, although you'd be hard-pressed to find a copy of it today. And then my next favorite was The Golden Star, Victory and Prophetic Poems. That lovely book was published right after the Great War. That would be World War I to you. The tremendous life loss of that war drove the need for communication with the dead. And spiritualism really, really played a big role. Alas, despite all my spiritualistic pursuits, I was involved in one scandal of a very physical sort. It was in the form of my husband, Culver Marshall. I married late in life, and I rather quickly realized I needed to rid myself of the, what is your contemporary word? The jerk. So I sued to have him evicted from my home in Hyde Park. Oh, the New York Times did have such fun. There was an entire lack of poetic atmosphere in county court today when Emma Victoria Pitkin Marshall sued her husband, Culver Marshall, for eviction as a squatter. Oh, I did not need such drama at the age of 56, really. Well, we did settle our differences, and he did leave me be, despite the fact that I did sort of have to use his name, except for my poetry. That is Emma Victoria Pitkin. Art being the fickle mistress it is, I did see my popularity wane as I aged, but you know, that was really all right. I had other interests to pursue. In the early 1930s, I became very involved with the Roosevelt Home Club. The Roosevelt Home Club's agenda was designed to support Governor, then President Roosevelt. I offered a poem at the opening of every meeting. Oh, and the ladies loved my offerings. Mrs. Roosevelt frequently attended, and she often wore a bunch of violets or a violet lapel pin. So, of course, I wrote her a poem. Oh, royal purple violets and blooms of brilliant blue have 3 times been entrusted by Duchess Old to you, to carry them in Washington and seek out our Lady Fair, with the request that she accept and our small tribute wear. And first time at the Mayflower with the presentation made, again within the White House, in her hands the flowers were laid, and graciously by her were worn during each solemn rite, and later at the Wondrous Ball, Inauguration Night. As many of you know, violets were a major industry in Rhinebeck. In 1940, Life magazine did a layout on President Roosevelt's hometown and the characters who lived here. I was featured in my library holding a book of poetry as if I were reading it, and the title was Emma Victoria Pitkin Marshall, the prolific village poet, opens each meeting with a poem. They named my age, stated my age as 70, even though I was 75. I think my spiritualistic fervor keeps me looking younger. My last book of poetry was published in 1941, and it was dedicated to President Roosevelt. It was titled Victory, although we were not yet at war. Was I prophetic? Did I know something others did not know because I was a friend of the president? I'll never tell. You'll have to read the book. I was born in 1866, at the end of the Civil War, an American tragedy. I died in January of 1946, right after the end of World War II. A world tragedy. The worst war our world has ever seen. But in between, I sought the higher ground. May you too seek the higher ground and make your lives be full of poetry. Good night.
Who can forget John Savage Hawley, inventor, businessman, and activist extraordinaire?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Believe it or not, you are looking at a real Renaissance man, or more accurately, what you in your modern age would call an entrepreneur. Howdy, y'all. Howdy, that's more like it. My name is John Savage Hawley, and please, forgive these affectations of my more youthful days of adventure. But who really wants to spend eternity in a stodgy business suit when you can stroll life eternal in the style and ease of Western wear? But beneath this exterior lies the heart of an adventurer, the soul of an inventor, and the spirit of a crusader. And, seeing as you're here for a visit, allow me to explain. I was born in 1836 that is, and grew up working my father's farm upstate in Schoharie County, small town of Carlton, New York. I did travel a bit in my youth. I even attended boarding school in the wild frontier of Michigan before returning to the farm. But the pattern of my life had been set. The lure of adventure and the call of opportunity held sway. In fact, it was adventure that called me south in '59 all the way down to Richmond, Texas, just a ways west-southwest of Houston, where I found employment as a jeweler with my brother Elisha. As a jeweler, I was a mere journeyman. I didn't compare to the artistry of David over there, who was true to his art, an artist. I was a journeyman. But we had a good run for 2 years, until 1861, that is, when Elisha and I found our two Yankee selves on the wrong side of the border in the Great Civil War. Now, as you can see, we did our best to blend in, but then we had another good run to the border as we skedaddled on out of there on a midnight schooner to Mexico, before eventually making our way out west to San Francisco. And it was in that foggy city in '62 that poor Elisha's earthly adventures came to an end. Well, not wanting to stay in that city alone, I started venturing my way back east, with a short detour of 8 years to Virginia City, Nevada, where I found employment as a clerk in a silver mining company. And it was there, ladies and gentlemen, that I saw my first great opportunity in the transportation sector. Well, the silver ore has to make it from the mines to the town for processing somehow, doesn't it? I found myself as superintendent and part owner of the Ophir Toll Road. With that extra capital, and with a boomtown springing up around me, I recognized yet another, more lucrative opportunity in the lumber trade. Now finally, with money to spare, I could spend time on my creative pursuits, and I invented and patented a new type of pipe with a corncob lined bowl. You see, seeing and seizing opportunities, those were my strengths. And creating things, that was my passion. And, judging from the sales of this pipe, my fellow townsfolk really seemed to enjoy the smoother smoke. Well, by now it was 1870, and wealthy from the sales of this pipe and my business interest, the sweet smell of success was calling me back east, in a more literal sense than you might know, but you presently will. And besides, ladies and gentlemen, as an eligible bachelor of 34 years at the time, I yearned for a wife after years and years of loneliness. And I met her, a Miss Margaret Reed, right here in New York. In fact, we were married there in St. James, at the very same altar where her mother was wed, and the very same church where our daughter eventually got hitched as well. But back to that sweet smell of success. As I said, I took it quite literally. And I got into the candy business. Why not? I was fully qualified. I'd done farming, jewelry, mining, and lumber. Who doesn't enjoy the creative challenge of candy to round out one's career? And I apprenticed myself to Manhattan's premier confectioners at Wallace & Company, and I applied the same effort to that endeavor as to all the others so I could learn what I needed to succeed. But in between the chocolates and the bonbons, the sweet smell of success I keep alluding to was often overshadowed and overpowered by a less savory aroma wafting up from the clogged pipes and drains of our modern indoor plumbing. And it was distracting, to say the least, time-consuming and expensive to call for and wait on a plumber every time. And I'm sure it's gotten better in the years since. Oh, so now we have three certainties: death, taxes, and plumbing. Well, regardless, there had to be a better way. And then the creative muse struck again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to my most useful invention, U.S. Patent 158937, the Elastic Force Cup. Fast, simple, and easy to use, its design has withstood the test of time and has barely changed in the 140 years since I first invented it. The success and popularity of this little plumber's friend allowed me to purchase my own candy company with my partner, William Hoops, in 1875. Hawley and Hoops was open for business, ladies and gentlemen. You might say we were flush with success. No, the puns don't get any better in the afterlife. We eventually became one of this nation's preeminent confectioners. Our block-long, 5-story building in the heart of New York City employed 800 workers, making everything from licorice pipes, if you can imagine where the inspiration for that came from, marshmallows, candies, chocolates, pressed candies, and my personal favorite, the chocolate cigar. Now here, ladies and gentlemen, was a creative endeavor I could really sink my teeth into. But my greatest contribution to these United States lay neither in the candy nor in the plunger, but more in the line of public health. You see, certain unscrupulous, and even some scrupulous manufacturers at the time, would adulterate their expensive sugar with a very cheap filler of terra alba, or what you call gypsum. Clearly, putting profit ahead of all other ethical concerns. And I'm sorry, that was not right. Sir, do you like dirt in your chocolate?
No, I do not.
You do not. It's not right. It's not right now. It wasn't right then. And I formed the American Confectioners Association in a crusade to put product quality and public health ahead of the concerns of profit. And believe it or not, the government soon took notice. And inspired by our efforts, Congress passed the Pure Food Act legislation, which has had a more beneficial impact on this nation's health than anything I might have created. Well, by now, ladies and gentlemen, time had passed. It was 1892, and sadly, my Margaret passed away and was buried here. But I was fortunate and blessed to be lifted from my grief 2 years later when I met and wed a Miss Margaretta Voss. Now, Margaretta, she encouraged my philanthropy, and with her support, I founded the Carleton Industrial Farm School for Boys in my old hometown. Before that siren, that sounds amazingly like a train, called me yet again for another adventure towards retirement. So, selling our business interest to the Mars Corporation. I believe they make something called M&Ms now. We settled out west in San Diego, California. And it was there, ladies and gentlemen, that my earthly adventure came to an end in 1913. You see, I suffered from nephritis. That's an inflammation of the kidneys. And I spurned the medical treatments my doctor ordered for a more prayerful approach to healing. In retrospect, I may not have recognized those very physician orders as the answer to those most furtive prayers. And perhaps, from time to time, we all miss God's answers when they're right in front of us. Regardless, my mortal shell made its final journey east to lay here beside Margaret, and eventually Margaretta too. So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, without any false modesty, I truly was a Renaissance man of varied career, an entrepreneur, to say the least, a crusader for public health, and hopefully an entertainer for your evening. Oh, thank you very much. Now, before you leave tonight, by the exit gate, you'll find a bag of M&Ms for each of you, courtesy of St. James, the Mars Corporation, and of course, Hawley and Hoops. Have a good night, y'all.
Let's recall Ruth Morgan, a fellow suffragette.
Come along now. Some of us have graves to spend the night in.
We can come in a little close. We can come in a little closer.
Are we all organized?
Yes.
Yes? Come on.
Yes.
Speak up, my dears. Are you not my Red Cross nurse volunteers?
Oh, yes, we are.
You don't look like them. Well, never mind. It matters not. I have always been very good at organization. That's a specialty of mine. Oh, but where was I? Oh, yes. I'm buried right here. My name is Ruth Morgan, and I'm a descendant of every prominent family from the Northeast, including 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence. But that is not enough for a Morgan girl. Now, my mother, Angelica, you met her sister here last year, Gertrude Livingston Lowndes, you remember. Well, my mother taught her girls to be more than ornaments of society. Now, it's true, when I was born in 1870, Queen Victoria was a force to be reckoned with, and the Gilded Age was the reality of the Newport and New York of my youth, but Morgan girls need to right the wrongs of the society that we lived in. Now, our townhouse was in Washington Square in New York. Beautiful. And we have a lovely mansion in Statsburg called Stonehurst, sadly gone now. I went to St. Margaret's Church, but there's no graveyard up there. So, here I am. I say I'm amongst very fine people, don't you? Although some of them are awfully noisy. Now, you try righting the wrongs of society while changing your clothes 6 times a day. Now, I have to say, my sister Margaret did quite well for herself. She was a suffragist, like myself, and Geraldine, the baby sister of the family, she became First Lady of New Jersey. And she was instrumental in introducing reform of prisons and the care of the mentally ill. She also became very good friends with, what's her name? Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes. But I chose another path. You see, my mother, she worked in a Bellevue Hospital. Bellevue Hospital is not far from our townhouse in Washington Square. She worked in the School of Nursing, so I followed in my mother's footsteps. And I also followed her into the Social Services Department, which she established. You'd be amazed at the need for social services in the Lower East Side. So many horrid living conditions, working conditions. This resulted in illness. But I have to say, it is my work during the Great War that would write the script for the remainder of my days, and the work that I am most proud of. Now, we did not enter that war until 1917. It took us a long time. And we finally got over there in 1918. And I, being the only female member of the Finance Committee of the American Red Cross, that and my knowledge of French language and culture, they sent me over there. You would have thought that we had learned nothing from Florence Nightingale and the Crimean. The nurses' services hit one obstacle after the next, a big bloody mess. They were not under the control of the army. The surgeons were constantly getting their trousers in a twist. Big surprise there. And somebody had to run the entire affair. Yours truly steps up. Now, I have to say, Julia Stimpson was in charge of the nurses. Brilliant woman. And they did have 50 portable hospital units, what you call MASH units today. But they needed someone with administrative finesse to run the show. Now, there was a great deal of controversy having me, a lay person, in charge of the nurses. And I felt bad about it for about a second. And then I got to work. The next time someone complains to you about modern technology, you just remind them of my modern technology. So many lost letters, mixed messages, letters arriving on the desks of doctors after they had gone home. That's helpful. Yes, non-stop mayhem. But it's the horrors that these nurses encountered that would leave them permanently scarred in the mind as well as the body. So, after the war, I helped form the committee. I was the chair of the Committee for the International Cooperation for the Prevention of War. I also served on the League of Women Voters, naturally, and I served on the Committee for the Causes and Cures of War. I know the titles are cumbersome, but the work was in earnest. I am glad, though, that I followed my mother to this spot in 1934. I died. Big disappointment, I know. But I did not have to see the Second World War. The second! So much for my Committee for the Causes and Cure of War. But my legacy, such as it is, was the smooth operating services of those nurses during the Great War and the continued vitality of the Social Services Department in the hospitals to this day. Not a bad legacy for somebody who had to learn how to curtsy and change their clothes 6 times a day. I do say so myself. Anyway, enough about me. Au revoir! Godspeed! Go pester my brother!
No tour is complete without Richard Jenkins, our first sexton.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing tonight? My name is Richard Jenkins, and I'm most happy to greet you here tonight. This is a special place to me, and not just because I'm buried over there. No, this is a special place because I spent most of my adult life here. First in the little church that Reverend McVicker designed back in 1811, and later on in this here building here that replaced it. I wouldn't say I was the most religious person around, not at first anyway. That's not why I was here so much. I was here because I worked here. I served this church nigh under 40 years as its sexton. Breathe in that air. That's church air. And I love it. Now, if you don't understand church lingo, I'll tell you where the sexton is. It's a janitor. Only more important. Yes, I cleaned the church and I dug the graves, but I also rang the bell on Sunday mornings and made sure everything was ready for worship. And in the wintertime, keeping those wooden stoves at just the right temperature was no easy task. In fact, most people brought hot bricks to church with them just to put at their feet for extra heat. In 1832, my duties grew considerably when Reverend Samuel Roosevelt Johnson decided that he was going to start a school for the local children. I was approximately 50 years old when he did that and getting way too old to be cleaning up after a bunch of youngsters. And Hyde, Jenkins, don't let anybody tell you that the children of the good old days were any better behaved than they are today. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. As best as anyone can recall, I was born in 1783 during the American Revolution. You know, when all you white folks was fighting for your freedom. But the ironically funny thing is, I wasn't free at all. I was what was known as a barred Negro, on the account of we were owned by the Bards, Dr. John Bard and his son, Dr. Samuel Bard. You may know him. He was George Washington's personal physician, and he also founded New York Hospital and New York School of Medicine. Now, don't get me wrong. The Bards were decent enough as slave owners go, and better than most, so I hear. They fed us and kept a roof over our heads and never beat us. But that don't give any man the right to claim ownership of another. Now, Dr. Samuel Bard, after his father had died and after his youngest, Eliza, had married that young man, John McVicker, he got it into his head to build a church. Young McVicker was studying to be a priest, you see. So he put us Bard Negroes to work a building. And when you know it, that young McVicker became our first rector. But I won't judge. I liked that little church. So Dr. Bard sent me to work as a sexton. I also liked that young McVicker. I keep saying young, but he was just a few years younger than me. He and his father-in-law didn't exactly see eye to about slavery. The Reverend being an abolitionist and all, he started a school for us black folk, slave and free, man, woman, and child alike. Taught me how to read and write. Taught me a lot about the Bible too, because that was what we studied out of. So my life wasn't as bad as it could have been. But given my druthers, I would rather have been free. I more or less told Dr. Bard that one day. You see, some Quakers came to town to check on a young slave boy by the name of Pompey to see if he was being held longer than the law allowed. That was during the time after children born after 1799 were getting old enough to demand their freedom. So Dr. Bard called Pompey in and told him to go talk to them. And he left the room in a huff, muttering under his breath, "Them abolitionists are fools." I said, well, mighty fine thing, though, that freedom. Dr. Bard says, "Bard Negroes have it good, don't they, Richard?" And I said, well, begging your pardon, Dr. Bard, but if slavery is such a wonderful thing, how about we trade places and you give it a try for a little while? He just laughed and walked away. You see, back in 1799, New York passed a law that said no slaves could be brought or sold, but that didn't mean we were free. And in 1817, they passed another law that said any slave born before July 4th, 1799 were to be let free after July 4th, 1827. That's me. So the Bards, they actually could have kept me until 1827, but Dr. Bard died in 1821 and he set me free in his will. 6 years later, slavery finally officially ended in New York, and those 6 years was precious to me and my family. All my children were born free. Of course, though, a lot of white folks didn't particularly like that law, so before they had to let their slaves go free, they took them down south and sold them to the plantations. And then we had to contend with the kidnappers who stole slaves and free black folk alike and sold them down south. So it was definitely not an easy time at all. But like I said, the Bards did set me free in 1821, and the good folk here at St. James, why, they let me continue doing the job I had already been doing for 10 years. Only now they paid me like a regular job. Compared to a lot of black folk around here, I had it pretty good. When I was a young man, I lived down by the river at Bard Rock with all of the other Bard Negroes, and I shared a little cabin with Jehiel Latimer. When we had free time, we used to go out on the river and catch some of the biggest shad you ever wanted to see. Of course, though, after freedom, I had to move. And the Bard sold me a small plot of land over at the Guinea community, what you all call Hackett Hill Park these days. And I built me my very own house and married my Nancy. Oh, she was a beauty. Oh, what a fine day that was when we got married. And we had as happy a marriage as you could hope for. She took to working alongside of me here at the church, washing and ironing the linens and the supplices and that sort of things. And children, we had 12. Most of them lived to adulthood too, and they good. Why, did you know my boy Henry became one of the most respected barbers here in Hyde Park? Yes, he did. And our youngest, Catherine, folks around here call her Kate, had her when I was 54 years old. She was my heart. She married a nice man by the name of William Carl, and they lived all their days here. Of course, though, Kate wasn't one to be rushed into things. She didn't get confirmed right here in this very church until she was 75 years old. That was when St. James was celebrating its 100th anniversary. Of course, though, come to think about it, I can't complain because I didn't get baptized myself until I was 46. Now, the people here at St. James, they love me, and I don't just say that out of pride. No, I got proof. Back in 1844, when they built this new building, they gave me my very own pew, big enough for my whole family. And having your own pew in those days was something special. Of course, though, it was in the back of the church. Well, my Nancy and I, we lived out all our days here in Hyde Park, and when I died in 1854, the people of St. James, they buried me right here at the church. Why, I can see Dr. Bard's grave from here. Yes, time was real rough for black folk back then, and from what I understand, they're still tough for people of color, although they are different. There's a lot of work to be done, and as Reverend McVicker taught me, God is Father to us all, just the same. Evil triumphs when good keeps quiet. Go out and make the world a better place. Speak out against evilness and act against wrongdoing. Watch and pray. I think the Bible put that watch first because if you don't watch, you may not be around to pray. So I want to thank you all for coming out. Go out and do some good. Y'all come back now, you hear? Good night.
Well, there you have it, Father Kramer. I hope that tour met your satisfaction.
You did wonderfully, Mrs. Norrie. Thank you so much for your hospitality.
You are most welcome. Have a good evening.
And you have a wonderful eternity. I hope you've enjoyed your visit with us tonight. Keep in touch. The tours will return next year. In the meantime, if you'd like to help St. James make up some of the income we lost, you can always make a donation to the church. That'll help ensure that we'll be able to put on these tours for years to come. Thanks for your support.